The Pacific Northwest wilderness is a place where secrets go to stay buried, but for William Wynne, it was the only place that felt like home. At number years old, the retired Navy SEAL still carried the silhouette of a warrior, tall, muscular, with broad shoulders that seemed to hold up the sky. His salt and pepper hair kept in a strict military buzz cut, and his short black and silver boxed beard framed a face etched with the history of 1,000 missions. As he hiked the rugged trails, his deep moss-green eyes, surrounded by deep crow's feet, scanned the tree line with tactical precision. Beside him stepped Smoky, a balmy kilogram German Shepherd Labrador cross with a coat of sleek black and tan fur. Smoky was the image of discipline, his erect ears twitching at Mott for every rustle of the wind, his intelligent dark brown eyes locked onto his master's pace. They weren't looking for trouble, they were looking for peace. But the peace was shattered when a tiny, trembling ball of fur stumbled onto the path. It was a puppy, no more than 8 weeks old, covered in mud and shivering with a terror that went bone deep. The pup didn't run away. Instead, it let out a haunting, rhythmic whimper, looking back toward the dark heart of the forest. William knelt, his powerful jawline tightening as he recognized the look in the puppy's eyes. It wasn't just fear, it was a plea for help. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. William reached out a calloused hand, his sun-kissed rugged skin a sharp contrast to the puppy's soft matted fur. Smoky leaned in, sniffing the newcomer with a protective gentleness. The puppy began to tug at William's cargo pants, its tiny teeth pulling with desperate strength toward a hidden trail overgrown with brambles. William stood up, his deep forehead wrinkles furrowing. He knew that look. He had seen it in the eyes of brothers in arms on the battlefield. This puppy was a scout, sent from a place of suffering to find a savior. "Something's wrong, Smoky," William whispered, his voice a low, gravelly resonance. The dog let out a sharp affirmative woof, his upright posture signaling he was ready for whatever lay ahead. William adjusted his gear, his mind switching from retired veteran to active rescue. The puppy's urgency was infectious, a silent scream for a mother left behind. Before we go deeper into this heart-wrenching rescue, if you believe that every animal deserves a hero, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel to support more stories of courage and compassion. The trail ahead was steep and treacherous, but for a man who had survived the world's most dangerous zones, there was no turning back when a life was on the line. The trio moved through the dense canopy, where the sunlight struggled to pierce the thick pine needles. William's square-jawed face was set in a mask of determination. Every step he took was silent, a habit born from years of elite service. He watched the puppy, who was now limping but refusing to stop. It was clear the small creature had travelled miles to find help. Smoky stayed on the flank, his long muzzle sniffing the air, catching scents that William's human nose could never detect. The air began to change. The fresh scent of pine was being replaced by the acrid stench of industrial grease and something more sinister, the smell of neglected animals. William felt a familiar tightening in his chest. His prominent nose twitched as he identified the distant sound of heavy machinery. They were approaching an old logging camp, one that was T on any modern map. He signaled Smoky to stay low. The veteran's moss-green eyes narrowed as he peered through the brush. He saw a clearing filled hat, rusted equipment and dilapidated shacks. This wasn't just a logging site, it was a fortress of isolation. The puppy stopped at the edge of the clearing, its tail tucked between its legs, shaking uncontrollably. It looked at William, then pointed its nose toward a heavy reinforced shed at the far end of the... William crept closer, using the shadows of the towering Douglas firs as cover. His muscular frame moved with a grace that defied his age. He could see several men in grease-stained coveralls moving around the site, but they weren't cutting wood. They were moving heavy crates marked with faded military stencils. Smoky fur rose along his spine, a low vibration humming in his throat. He sensed the distress before William heard it, the faint, rhythmic clinking of heavy metal chains hitting the floor. It wasn't a mechanical sound, it was the sound of a living being in a cage. William pulled a pair of compact binoculars from his vest. He focused on the shed. Through a narrow, barred window, he caught a glimpse of movement. A large, gaunt dog was chained to a structural post. Even from a distance, William could see the mother dog's ribs and the scars that marred her once beautiful coat. She looked like a shadow of a dog, her head resting dejectedly on her paws. The puppy let out a tiny, muffled whimper, and the mother dog's ears flickered. She lifted her head, her eyes dull with exhaustion, but filled with a sudden flickering hope. William's grip on the binoculars tightened until his knuckles turned white. He realized this wasn't just a case of animal cruelty. He had stumbled upon something Mojehat more organized and far more illegal. William retreated a few yards to consult with Smoky. "They reusing this place as a holding cell," he muttered, his deep forehead wrinkles deepening. He recognized the markings on the crates. They were similar to the ones used to transport K9 units in the service. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This was an illegal trafficking ring, specializing in high-value breeds often used for military or private security contracts. These weren't just pets. They were being treated as disposable equipment, stolen or bred in horrific conditions to be sold to the highest bidder on the black market. The mother dog inside was clearly a retired or failed breeder, discarded and beaten because she was no longer profitable. William looked down at the puppy. The little scout had escaped the pen to find a man who looked like the heroes he had seen in his dreams. William's salt and pepper beard bristled as he checked his surroundings. He had no weapons, and he had promised himself no more wars, but as he looked at Smoky, his loyal partner, and then at the shivering puppy, he knew his mission had just changed. He wouldn't use bullets, but he would use every ounce of his SEAL training to bring this operation down and save the mother dog before her time ran out. The rescue was no longer just an act of kindness. It was a tactical intervention. William Wynne didn't need a rifle to be dangerous. He had a mind trained by decades of elite warfare. He sat in the brush, his moss-green eyes tracking the movement of the 4 guards in the clearing. He noted their patterns, the way they lingered near the generator, the gaps in their perimeter. His broad shoulders remained relaxed, a sign of a man who had mastered his adrenaline. Beside him, Smoky remained a statue of tan and black fur. The dog's intelligent dark brown eyes followed William's gaze, understanding the silent command to remain invisible. "We do this quiet, Smoky," William whispered. He began to map out the camp in his head, identifying the blind spots created by the stacks of timber and the rusted logging equipment. He was looking for a fight. He was looking for an extraction. His goal was the shed. The puppy sat between his boots, its tiny heart racing against his ankle. William reached down, his rough, sun-kissed hand offering a moment of grounding strength to the small creature. He knew the risks. If they were caught, these men wouldn't hesitate to protect their illegal property. But a Navy SEAL never leaves a soul behind, especially not a mother who had sent her only hope into the dark to find him. To get to the shed, William needed the guards away from the center of the camp. He spotted an old diesel generator vibrating near the main shack, its exposed wires and leaking fuel lines a testament to the camp's neglect. With a silent nod to Smoky, the two began to circle the perimeter. William moved with the fluid, calculated steps of a predator, his salt and pepper Bayou date cut blending into the grey-green shadows of the pines. He reached the generator shed, his square-jawed face illuminated by the flickering light of a nearby work lamp. He didn't sabotage it with violence. He simply adjusted the pressure valve on the fuel intake. Within seconds, the engine began to cough and sputter, emitting a thick black cloud of smoke that masked the area. As the guards shouted and ran toward the failing machine, William and Smoky vanished from the tree line and sprinted toward the rear of the dog shed. The puppy followed, its tiny legs working double time to keep up with the giants. They reached the back wall, the wood rotted and soft. William jammed his fingers into a gap, his muscular arms bulging as he pried a board loose. He didn't use a crowbar, he used the raw strength of a man driven by a singular, righteous purpose. The interior of the shed was dim, smelling of old straw and heartbreak. As William slipped inside, his moss-green eyes adjusted quickly to the gloom. In the corner, chained to a heavy iron ring, was the mother dog. She was a beautiful shepherd mix, but her spirit had been systematically crushed. Her tan fur was matted vekepite dirt, and her eyes, once bright like Smoky's, were clouded vekepite pain and resignation. She didn't bark. She only let out a low, defeated whine. She had seen men enter this shed before, and it never meant anything. Then the puppy broke rank. It skittered across the floor, letting out a series of high-pitched yaps. The mother dog's head snapped up. Her tail gave a singular, weak thump against the floor. As the puppy nuzzled into her neck, the mother began to lick its face, her whimpers turning into soft maternal sobs. William stood back, his powerful jawline tightening as he witnessed the reunion. Smoky walked over, his perfectly upright posture a sign of respect, and sniffed the mother dog's ear. It was a silent communication between canines, a promise that the nightmare was ending. William knelt beside her, his deep forehead wrinkles softening as he reached for the heavy padlock on her chain. The padlock was a heavy industrial-grade hunk of steel. William examined it, his fingers tracing the cold metal. He knew the guards would be back as soon as they realized the generator was a ruse. He looked at the mother dog. Up close, he could see the marks of the heavy collars she had been forced to wear. She looked at William, and for the first time the fear in her eyes began to melt into a cautious, desperate trust. She saw the silver streaks in his beard and the kindness in his moss-green eyes, and she rested her heavy head in his palm. "What they got you?" William murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He used a small set of tension tools he kept in his survival kit, his hands steady despite the ticking clock. The mechanism clicked. The heavy chain fell to the floor with a dull thud that sounded like a victory. The mother dog tried to stand, but her legs, weakened by confinement, buckled. Without a second thought, William reached down. He scooped the Jaime Lam Kilo Gam dog into his muscular arms, holding her against his broad chest. She was light, too light, and she tucked her head under his chin, shivering. He was no longer just a soldier, he was a sanctuary. With the mother dog in his arms and the puppy nipping at his heels, William signalled to Smoky. "Lead the way, boy. High ground." Smoky turned, his black and tan coat a blur as he scouted the exit. They slipped out of the shed just as the guards' voices grew louder near the generator. They were moving into the dense brush, leaving the camp behind, but William knew the mission was over. He had to get these animals to safety and ensure this ring could never hurt another soul. The bond between a human and a dog is a sacred one, and seeing this Mother-S hope restored is why we share these stories. If you want to see more incredible rescues, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like to help us reach more animal lovers. As they climbed the ridge, the sun began to set, casting long orange shadows across the forest floor. William's breathing was heavy but rhythmic. He looked down at the mother dog, whose eyes were now fixed on the horizon, watching the world she thought she'd never see again. The path ahead was long, and the men in the camp would soon realize their inventory was gone. But they didn't know they were hunting a Navy SEAL, and William Wynne was just getting started. As the last light of day bled into a deep, bruised purple, William reached a narrow granite shelf overlooking the valley. He gently set the mother dog down on a bed of dry pine needles. His muscular chest heaved with the effort of the climb, but his moss-green eyes remained sharp, scanning the shadows below. He saw the flickering beams of flashlights dancing through the trees like angry fireflies. The guards had discovered the empty shed. They weren't just angry, they were panicked. They kanoe they kept that if the merchandise vanished, their employers would be far less than merciful. William knelt, his salt and pepper beard catching the faint moonlight. He checked the mother dog's paws. They were raw and swollen. She looked up at him, a soft whimper escaping her throat. Beside her, the puppy was already curled into her side, seeking the warmth she hadn't been able to give in weeks. Smoky stood guard at the edge of the shelf, his Barma kilogram frame silhouetted against the rising moon. He was a silent sentinel, his black and tan fur blending perfectly into the... William knew they couldn't stay long. He had to lead the pursuit away from the dogs. He began to strip bark from a nearby cedar, his powerful hands working vekepte, hat-practiced efficiency to create a series of false trails. William Wynne had spent years learning how to disappear in environments much harsher than this. He understood that the men following him were amateurs, brutes who relied on fear rather than skill. As he laid the breadcrumbs that would lead the guards toward a steep, impassable ravine, his deep forehead wrinkles creased in thought. He wasn't just thinking about the rescue anymore, he was thinking about the evidence. When he had pried the boards from the shed, he had spotted a discarded manifest, a list of assets destined for overseas transport. He pulled the crumpled paper from his pocket. In the moonlight, his moss-green eyes narrowed as he read the names of various private military contractors. This wasn't just a local operation, it was a node in a global network. They were stealing highly trained service animals and rebranding them for profit. It made his blood boil. These dogs were heroes, or the descendants of heroes, being sold like scrap metal. He tucked the paper into his vest, his square-jawed face hardened. He would get the mother and pup to safety. But then he was coming back to burn this syndicate to the ground, metaphorically and legally. The mother dog, whom William began to call Bella in his mind, tried to stand, but her back legs trembled and gave way. William realized she was suffering from severe malnutrition and muscle atrophy. He couldn't carry her forever, and the guards were closing the gap. He needed a place to hide them, a place even the most seasoned tracker would miss. He looked at Smoky. The dog's intelligent brown eyes seemed to understand the dilemma. Smoky nudged a heavy curtain of ivy hanging over a fissure in the rock wall. It was an old mining vent. barely wide enough for a man but perfect for a dog. William crawled inside first, his broad shoulders barely clearing the entrance. It opened into a small, dry chamber. He ushered Bella and the puppy inside, then signaled Smoky to follow. Inside the cave, the air was cool and silent. William sat in the dark, the only sound the rhythmic breathing of the 3 dogs. He felt the weight of his Nammy years in his joints, but his resolve was unbreakable. He was a protector by nature, and tonight this small, broken family was his entire world. Outside, the sound of heavy boots crunching on dry leaves grew louder. "They couldn't have gone fave kepite had that mangy mutt," one of the guards growled. William stayed perfectly still, his hand resting on Smoky's neck to keep the dog calm. He watched through the ivy as 2 men passed by, their flashlight beams swinging wildly. One of them stopped just feet from the entrance, his boots kicking up dust. William's powerful jawline tightened. He reached for a heavy stone, not to throw it, but to use as a distraction if they got too close. The guard grunted, complaining about the cold and the useless dogs. He spat on the ground, missing the entrance by inches. To these men, Bella was just a number on a ledger. To William, she was a mother who had risked everything to save her child. The guards eventually moved on, lured by the false trail William had laid earlier. As their voices faded into the distance, William let out a long, silent breath. The immediate danger had passed, but they were still miles from the main road, and Bella's strength was fading fast. He needed to find a way to signal for Hatelerpe without alerting the syndicate. In the quiet of the cave, William shared the last of his protein bars with Bella and the puppy. He watched as the puppy vigorously licked the crumbs from his palm, its tiny tail giving a frantic, happy wag. For a moment the rugged veteran smiled, the crow's feet around his moss-green eyes deepening. It was a small victory, but in this dark place it felt like the sun. He looked at Bella, who had finally fallen into a deep, restorative sleep, her head resting on Smoky's flank. "You re-safe now," he whispered, his voice barely a breath. He pulled out his satellite phone, a relic from his contracting days. He had one contact he could trust, a former teammate who now worked in animal welfare and law enforcement. He typed out a brief, coded message with his coordinates and the words, "Extraction needed, high-value assets recovered, evidence of trafficking confirmed." As he hit send, he knew the wheels of justice were finally turning. He leaned his head against the cold stone wall, closing his eyes for a few minutes of rest. He had saved the mother, but the war for her kind was just beginning. As the first light of dawn filtered through the ivy-covered entrance of the cave, William Wynne was already awake. A man of his background never truly slept. He simply rested in states of Har-Go-Hut readiness. His moss-green eyes, though tired, were clear and focused. He watched as Bella, the mother dog, stirred. She looked significantly better after a night of rest and a bit of food, but she was still fragile. Beside her, the puppy was a bundle of morning energy, its tiny tail thumping against the cave floor. Smoky stood at the entrance, his upright posture and pointed ears signaling that the perimeter was clear for now. William checked his satellite phone. A single message glowed on the screen. "On the way, ETA Kumchin Kong Kong. Extraction point, Old Ranger Station." That was 5 miles away across rugged terrain. He looked at Mortf, his reflection in the darkened screen, the deep forehead wrinkles and the silver streaks in his beard. He felt every one of his 50 years this morning, but he also felt a surge of purpose that had been missing since his retirement. He stood up, his broad shoulders filling the narrow space. "Time to move, team," he whispered. He knew the guards would be doubling their efforts now that the sun was up, and they would be looking for a man with 3 dogs. The trek toward the ranger station was a masterclass in tactical movement. William led the way, his muscular frame cutting a path through the dense undergrowth while ensuring Bella had the easiest possible route. He chose the ghost trails, low-lying creek beds and rocky outcroppings that left no footprints. Smoky acted as the rear guard, frequently stopping to sniff the wind and listen for the sound of approaching engines or voices. Every time the puppy drifted too far, Smoky would gently nudge the little one back toward its mother with his long muzzle. William's sun-kissed, rugged skin was slick. They kept their hearts sweat as they climbed a steep ridge. He was constantly checking back on Bella. Her spirit was willing, but her body was still recovering from the months of abuse in the logging camp. At one point, her legs gave out on a slippery slope of wet pine needles. Before she could slide, William was there, his powerful hands catching her. He didn't say a word, but the way his moss-green eyes softened as he patted her head spoke volumes. He saw in her the same resilience he had seen in the bravest soldiers. She wasn't just a dog, she was a survivor who had endured the unthinkable to keep her pup alive. 3 miles in, they encountered their first major obstacle. The Silver Creek, usually a lazy stream, the recent spring thaw had turned it into a rushing torrent of cold grey water. There was no bridge for miles and the crossing was exposed. William stood at the bank, his square-jawed face set in a grim line. To cross meant being seen from the ridges above, but to stay meant being trapped. He scanned the water, his deep crow's feet tightening as he looked for a shallow point. He spotted a series of partially submerged boulders. "Stay close, Smoky," he commanded. William waded into the icy water first, the current pulling at his muscular legs. He reached the center and turned, bracing himself against a rock. He whistled low, and Smoky hopped onto the first boulder with the grace of an athlete. Then came the hard part. Bella looked at the rushing water with terror. The trauma of her past made every new challenge a mountain. William reached out his calloused hand. "Trust me, girl," he said, his voice a steady anchor in the roar of the creek. Slowly, tentatively, she stepped into the shallows, the puppy tucked safely against her side as William guided them through the foam. They were halfway across when the sound of a distant dirt bike echoed through the canyon. William froze. His moss-green eyes scanned the ridgeline and spotted a flash of red. One of the guards. The man hadn't seen them yet, but he was heading toward the crossing. William didn't panic. He moved with the calculated speed of a seal. He hurried Bella and the puppy to the far bank, where a thicket of weeping willows offered cover. He signaled Smoky to stay submerged in the reeds. The dirt bike roared to the edge of the opposite bank. The guard killed the engine and stood up, scanning the water. William held his breath, his hand resting on the mother dog's muzzle to keep her silent. He could see the guard's face, a man half his age, fueled by malice and greed. The guard pulled out a pair of binoculars and swept the area. For a heart-stopping minute, the lenses pointed directly at their thicket. William's powerful jawline tightened. He was ready to intervene if the man crossed. But then, a hawk shrieked downstream, drawing the guard's attention. Thinking he'd seen movement elsewhere, the man restarted his bike and sped off, leaving a trail of exhaust that lingered in the damp air. The final mile was the hardest. Bella was limping heavily now, her energy spent. William didn't hesitate. He scooped her up once more, his broad shoulders absorbing her weight as they made the final push toward the old ranger station. As they crested the last hill, he saw a familiar sight, a black SUV with tinted windows parked near the dilapidated wooden cabin. A tall man in a tactical jacket was leaning against the hood. It was Marcus, William's old teammate. When Marcus saw the rugged veteran emerging from the woods, covered in mud but carrying a dog with a puppy following behind, he let out a low whistle. "You never could just go for a normal hike, could you, Wynne?" William managed a tired smile, the wrinkles around his eyes deepened. He set Bella down on the grass, and she immediately collapsed, her tail wagging feebly as Marcus approached with a bowl of water and a medical kit. For the first time in years, Bella was surrounded by people who saw her not as property but as a hero. The immediate danger was over, but as William looked back at the dark forest, his expression turned cold. The rescue was complete, but the justice phase of the mission was just beginning. The black SUV sped away from the forest, leaving the shadows of the logging camp far behind. Inside, the climate-controlled cabin felt like another planet compared to the damp, terrifying cave. William Wynne sat in the back seat, his broad shoulders leaning against the window as he watched the rugged terrain disappear. Bella, the mother dog, was sprawled across the middle row, her head resting in Marcus's lap while he administered a mild IV for dehydration. The puppy, now exhausted from its heroic journey, was fast asleep against William's thigh. Smoky sat in the rear cargo area, his intelligent, dark brown eyes never leaving the perimeter through the back glass. Even in safety, the Barmikilo Gam Protector remained vigilant. William looked down at his own hands, calloused, sun-kissed, and still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. His moss-green eyes reflected a mix of relief and simmering fury. He pulled the crumpled manifest from his pocket and handed it to Marcus. "They aren't just local thugs," William said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "This is a hub for a global network. They re-stealing washouts from training programs and selling them to the highest bidder." The gravity of the situation was clear. They hadn't just saved a family, they had uncovered a conspiracy. By the time they reached Marcus's secure facility, a secluded ranch designed for K9 rehabilitation, the sun was high in the sky. William carried Bella inside, his muscular frame moving with careful, steady steps to avoid jarring her. He laid her on a soft orthopedic bed, and for the first time in years the mother dog didn't flinch when a human approached. She looked at William, her eyes tracking the silver streaks in his black beard, and let out a soft sigh of content. While the veterinary team took over, William and Marcus spread the manifest across a tactical table. The deep forehead wrinkles on William's face grew more pronounced as they cross-referenced the names on the list. These coordinates, William pointed with a thick finger. They aren't logging sites. They re-shipping ports. The syndicate was moving dogs under the guise of industrial equipment. It was a cold, calculated business that stripped these animals of their dignity. William's square-jawed face hardened. He knew the authorities would need more than just a piece of paper. They needed a witness. And while he was retired, his moss-green eyes still held the fire of a man who would stop until the job was done. As the afternoon progressed, Belle's personality began to emerge from the wreckage of her past. With the bond removed and a bowl of high-protein food in her belly, she managed to stand on her own. She walked over to where William sat, nudging his hand with her long, elegant muzzle. The puppy followed, tripping over its own paws as it tried to mimic its mother's movements. William reached down, his rugged skin a contrast to the soft fur of the pup. He felt a deep connection to these creatures. They were veterans of a different kind of war. "You've done enough, Will," Marcus said, leaning against the doorframe. "Let the federal teams handle the raid." But William shook his head, his salt and pepper Bayou-date cut catching the light. "Mort can no overkep that camp. Mort know where the hidden cells are. If they go in with sirens blaring, those men will destroy the evidence and the other dogs." He wasn't looking for a gunfight. He was looking for a surgical strike. He wanted to ensure that every cage was opened and every pup was accounted for. His military training wasn't just a career, it was a lifelong commitment to the defenseless. William spent the next hour sketching the layout of the logging camp from memory. His tactical mind, sharpened by years of SEAL operations, identified the weak points in the syndicate's security. He didn't want violence, he wanted a total shutdown. "We use the drones for thermal imaging first," William instructed, his voice authoritative. "We identify the location of every animal before we make a move. No shooting, no chaos. We cut their power and their communications, we box them in." Smoky stood by the table, his erect ears twitching as if he were listening to the briefing. He was a cross between a German Shepherd and a Labrador, but in this moment he looked like a purebred warrior. His upright posture and focused gaze mirrored his master. William looked at his loyal companion. "You're staying here to guard Bella and the little ones, Smoky. This is a solo recon." Smoky let out a soft whine, his intelligent eyes pleading to join, but he eventually sat back, accepting the order. William's mission was clear. He was going back into the heart of the pines, but this time he was bringing the light of justice with him. As twilight descended, William Wynne prepared for his return to the logging camp. He traded his hiking gear for a dark tactical reconnaissance suit that emphasized his muscular build and broad shoulders. He looked in the mirror, seeing the deep crow's feet around his eyes, the marks of a man who had seen too much, but was still willing to see more if it meant saving a life. He wasn't the same man who had started that hike 2 hours ago. He was a man with a purpose that transcended his own retirement. He stepped outside into the cool night air. The ranch was quiet save for the distant sound of a coyote. He looked through the window one last time. Bella was curled up with the puppy, her tail occasionally wagging in her sleep. She was safe, but dozens of others weren't. With a final nod to Marcus, William climbed into a secondary vehicle. He knew the guards would be on high alert, but they were expecting a drifter or a local. They weren't expecting a 9-year-old Navy SEAL with a score to settle. The heart of the forest was calling, and this time the ghost was coming to stay. The logging camp was a wound on the landscape, and under the cover of a moonless sky, William Wynne moved like a shadow returning to its source. He wore a dark tactical fleece that emphasized his broad shoulders and powerful build. His moss-green eyes were sharp, scanning the perimeter through thermal goggles provided by Marcus. He saw the heat signatures of the guards, huddled around a fire, oblivious to the fact that a 9-year-old Navy SEAL was dismantling their world one step at a time. William's military buzz cut and short, boxed beard were damp with the evening mist, but he felt no cold. His focus was on the large reinforced barn he had missed during his first frantic rescue. The manifest had mentioned high-value stock, and his gut told him there were more dogs inside. He moved with the silence of a ghost, his rugged skin blending into the rough bark of the pines. Every time a guard looked in his direction, William became a statue, his deep forehead wrinkles frozen in concentration. He wasn't there for revenge. He was there for the ones who couldn't escape on their own. William reached the rear of the main barn. With a pair of heavy-duty snips, he bypassed the perimeter wire. As he slipped inside, the sight that met him through his goggles nearly broke his warrior's heart. Rows of small, cramped cages lined the walls. Inside were dozens of dogs, some purebred shepherds, some labs, all of them silent, their spirits crushed by the syndicate's cruelty. They didn't bark, they only watched Vekeptehat hollow eyes as the giant man moved among them. William's square-jawed face tightened until his powerful jawline was a hard ridge. He saw the training equipment, heavy chains, restrictive muzzles, and harsh light. This was a factory of fear. He moved to the first cage, his calloused hands working the latch. A young golden retriever cowered in the corner, but as William whispered a low, rhythmic comfort, the dog tentatively licked his hand. "Hold on, just a little longer," William murmured. He wasn't just rescuing animals, he was reclaiming the honor of his own profession. Seeing these military-grade dogs treated with such disrespect, he planted a series of small electronic beacons, trackers for the federal team that was only minutes away. The silence of the forest was suddenly shattered, but not by gunfire. High-intensity floodlights erupted from the tree line, bathing the camp in a blinding artificial noon. The sound of heavy rotors thrashed the air as two black helicopters descended. William stayed low inside the barn, guarding the cages. He watched through the slats as the guards scrambled, dropping their flashlights in terror. Marcus's voice boomed over a megaphone. "This is a federal intervention. Drop your weapons and move to the center of the clearing." The syndicate members, used to bullying helpless animals, had no stomach for a fight against a professional task force. They were rounded up in minutes, their faces pale as they realized their operation had been dismantled from the inside out. William stepped out of the barn as the authorities secured the site. He looked at the lead agent, a woman who had worked with Marcus for years. She saw the silver-streaked beard and the moss-green eyes of the man who had started it all. "We've got it from here, Wynne," she said with a nod of profound respect. "The veterinary transports are right behind us." 2 weeks later, the sun was shining over Marcus Rehabilitation Ranch. The air was filled with the scent of wild clover and the sound of happy barking. William Wynne sat on the porch, his muscular frame finally at rest. Beside him, Smoky lay with his head on his paws, his intelligent dark brown eyes watching the gate. A familiar truck pulled up, and as the door opened, a blur of tan and black fur exploded toward the porch. It was Bella. She was unrecognizable from the skeletal dog William had carried out of the woods. Her coat was glossy, her gait was strong, and her eyes were bright with a life she had once thought lost. The puppy, now named Ace by the ranch staff, tumbled out behind her, yapping with joy. Bella didn't run to the food bowl or the other dogs. She ran straight to William. She leaned her weight against his leg, letting out a long, contented sigh. William reached down, his sun-kissed hand stroking her ears. The deep crow's feet around his eyes crinkled as he smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached his soul. The story of the Navy SEAL and the puppy who begged for his help became a legend in the Pacific Northwest. But for William, it was simply a matter of duty. He decided to stay at the ranch, using his retirement to help train the rescued dogs for a new purpose. As service companions for other veterans, Smoky became his lead assistant, his perfectly upright posture serving as a model for the younger dogs. Bella remained by William's side, a constant reminder that no one, regardless of how beaten they have been, is ever beyond saving. As the sun set over the mountains, casting a golden glow on the warrior and his dogs, the world felt a little more balanced. The syndicate was behind bars, the forest was quiet once more, and a family that had been broken by chains was now whole in the light of freedom. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of courage and redemption. If this story touched your heart, remember that heroes come in many forms, sometimes in tactical boots and sometimes with 4 paws and a wet nose. We look to see you in the next story of loyalty and love.
The Channel, the Dog, and the Veteran is a storytelling platform created for entertainment, inspiration, education, and the promotion of positive emotional values. All stories presented on this channel are fictional and are creatively developed based on themes such as courage, loyalty, resilience, and the special bond between veterans and their dogs. The content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is purely coincidental.